No one noticed the delivery girl's black eye until the client opened the door and froze. Welcome back to our incredible storytelling channel. Before we dive into today's powerful and moving story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest content. We'd absolutely love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us which city or country you're tuning in from. Your engagement means the world to us and helps us reach more people with these important stories. Now let's begin this touching tale of courage, recognition, and unexpected kindness that will remind you how one moment of genuine human connection can change everything. Jessica Martinez adjusted her baseball cap for the 100th time that evening, pulling the brim lower over her face as she balanced 3 insulated bags against her hip. The purple bruise around her left eye had darkened since yesterday, and despite her careful application of concealer that morning, she could feel it throbbing with each step up the apartment building's stairs. At 24, she had been delivering food for Grubhub for 8 months now, ever since she lost her job at the bookstore. The work was exhausting, and the pay barely covered her rent, but it kept her moving, kept her away from the cramped studio apartment she shared with Derek, and most importantly, it gave her an excuse to be anywhere but home. Tonight's shift had been particularly brutal. She'd been working since 11 a.m., covering lunch and dinner rushes across downtown Seattle, her beat-up Honda Civic racking up miles as she navigated between restaurants and hungry customers. The bruise made everything harder. She had to keep her head down, avoid eye contact, and speak as little as possible. Most customers barely looked at her anyway, treating delivery drivers like human vending machines who appeared at their doors with food and then vanished back into the night. Jessica climbed the stairs to apartment 4B, her legs aching from 12 hours of constant movement. This was her last delivery of the night, Thai food from that expensive place on Pine Street that charged $30 for pad Thai. The customer had tipped well in the app, which was the only reason she'd taken an order this far from the downtown core at nearly 10 p.m. She knocked on the door and waited, fishing her phone from her pocket to mark the delivery as completed. Footsteps approached from inside the apartment, and she instinctively tilted her head down, letting the cap's shadow fall across her face. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged man in paint-stained clothes, and Jessica held out the bags without looking up. "Order for Thompson," she said in the practiced monotone she'd perfected for these interactions. "Thanks," the man replied, taking the bags and closing the door before Jessica could even finish turning away. This was how it always went. Quick, impersonal exchanges where she remained essentially invisible to the people she served. She was just a function, not a person, certainly not a person who might be struggling, who might need help, who might be carrying more than just their dinner in her tired hands. Back in her car, Jessica checked her earnings for the day, $143 before gas and car maintenance costs. It wasn't enough. It was never enough, but it would have to do. Derek had been increasingly angry about money lately, about everything lately, and she knew tonight would bring another confrontation. The bruise around her eye was evidence of their last discussion about her inability to contribute more to their household expenses. As she drove home through the wet Seattle streets, Jessica caught glimpses of her reflection in the rearview mirror. The bruise was impossible to miss now that she was alone, a dark purple stain that marked her as someone who couldn't even protect herself. She thought about the dozens of customers she'd served today, all of them too busy or too indifferent to notice that the person bringing them their meals was falling apart one delivery at a time. Tomorrow would bring another shift, another collection of faceless transactions, where she handed over food and collected tips from people who would forget her the moment their door closed. But tomorrow would also bring her one step closer to saving enough money to leave Derek, to find her own place, to reclaim the person she used to be before fear became her constant companion. Jessica pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment, gathering the strength she would need to walk through her own front door. The delivery bags were empty now, but somehow she felt heavier than when the evening had started. 2 weeks later, Jessica found herself driving up the winding roads of Queen Anne Hill, Seattle's most exclusive neighborhood, where mansions sat behind iron gates and manicured lawns that probably cost more to maintain than she made in a year. The GPS had led her to an imposing stone residence with tall windows that glowed warmly against the October evening. This delivery was different from her usual route. a single order from an upscale Italian restaurant that catered to the city's elite, placed by someone named Dr. Marcus Chen. The tip had been unusually generous, $50 on a $60 order, which was the only reason Jessica had accepted a delivery this far from her usual territory. She needed every dollar she could get. Her savings account had finally reached $800, enough for a security deposit on a studio apartment, but she still needed first month's rent and enough to survive until she could figure out a new living situation. The bruise around her eye had faded to a yellowish green, but a fresh one had appeared on her jaw 3 days ago when Derek discovered she had been hiding money in an old coffee can behind the washing machine. She'd told him it was for groceries, for their shared expenses, but his reaction had been swift and violent. The physical pain was nothing compared to the fear that he was beginning to suspect her real intentions. Jessica parked in the circular driveway and gathered the elegant bags from Romano's, the kind of restaurant where a single appetizer cost more than she spent on food in a week. The house loomed above her, all warm light and architectural elegance, representing a world so far removed from her own reality that it might as well have been on another planet. She climbed the stone steps to the front door, her beaten sneakers silent against the expensive masonry. The door was heavy wood, with stained glass panels that cast colorful shadows across the entryway. Jessica pressed the doorbell and heard soft chimes echo through what sounded like a vast interior space. Footsteps approached, and she automatically assumed her usual position, head down, cap pulled low, bags ready for a quick handoff. But when the door opened, something felt different. Instead of the immediate exchange she was used to, there was silence, complete, absolute silence. Jessica waited for the familiar routine to begin, for hands to reach out and take the bags, for a brief "thank you," and the closing door. But nothing happened. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, the expensive food growing heavier in her arms, until curiosity finally made her look up. Dr. Marcus Chen, she assumed, was staring at her with an expression she had never seen from a customer before. Not impatience, not indifference, but something that looked almost like recognition mixed with concern. He was tall and lean, probably in his 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of expensive casual clothing that suggested wealth worn comfortably rather than displayed. But it was his expression that stopped Jessica's automatic customer service response in her throat. He wasn't looking at her the way customers usually did, as a service provider to be quickly dismissed. He was looking at her like she was a person he was genuinely seeing for the first time. "Are you—" he began, then stopped himself, his eyes focusing on the faded bruise around her eye and the newer discoloration along her jawline. Jessica felt heat rise in her cheeks and automatically adjusted her cap, trying to hide what she suddenly realized was completely visible in the warm light spilling from his doorway. She had grown so accustomed to being invisible that she had forgotten how obvious her injuries would be to someone who actually bothered to look at her face. "Your order from Romano's," she said quickly, holding out the bags and trying to end this interaction before it could become something more complicated than a simple food delivery. But Dr. Chen didn't immediately take the bags. Instead, he stepped back from the doorway and said something that no customer had ever said to her before. "Would you like to come in for a moment?" Jessica's first instinct was to decline politely and get back to her car as quickly as possible. Customers didn't invite delivery drivers into their homes, especially not customers who lived in mansions on Queen Anne Hill. But something in Dr. Chen's voice made her hesitate. It wasn't the tone of someone making a casual offer or someone with ulterior motives. It was the voice of someone who had recognized something in her that required immediate attention. "I should get going," she said automatically. "I have other deliveries." "Do you?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "It's almost 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. Most restaurants stop delivering around 9:30. Jessica realized he was right. This had been her last pickup of the night, and she had no other deliveries waiting, her lie hung between them, transparent and unnecessary. "I'm a doctor," Dr. Chen continued, his voice carefully professional but kind. "And I'm concerned about those injuries on your face. They look like they need medical attention." "I'm fine," Jessica said quickly, the response that had become automatic whenever anyone noticed her bruises. I fell. Stairs. I'm clumsy." Dr. Chen's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he had heard this explanation before, probably from other patients who had fallen downstairs with suspicious frequency. My name is Marcus, and he said, ignoring her obvious lie with compassionate directness. I'm a trauma surgeon at Harborview Medical Center. Part of my job involves recognizing certain types of injuries, and I can tell you with medical certainty that what I'm seeing on your face wasn't caused by a fall. Jessica felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. For months, she had perfected the art of being invisible, of moving through the world without anyone noticing her pain or asking uncomfortable questions. But this stranger, this customer she was supposed to serve and forget, was seeing through every protective layer she had built around herself. Please, Marcus continued, stepping back to make the doorway less imposing. Just come in for 5 minutes. Let me take a look at those injuries and make sure you're okay. No questions, no pressure, just basic medical care. Against every instinct she had developed over the past year, Jessica found herself nodding and stepping through the doorway into Marcus Chen's home. The interior was even more impressive than she had imagined. High ceilings, warm hardwood floors, and walls lined with books and art that spoke of both wealth and education. But what struck her most was how warm and lived-in everything felt, despite its obvious expense. Marcus led her to a comfortable living room and gestured toward a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. "Can I get you something to drink? Water? Tea?" he asked, settling into a chair across from her with enough distance to keep the interaction feeling professional rather than intimate. "Water would be good," Jessica admitted, realizing she had been running on coffee and adrenaline for most of the day. When Marcus returned with a glass of water and what appeared to be a basic first aid kit, Jessica noticed that he moved with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to treating injuries. "I meant what I said about no questions," he said, sitting back down. "But I would like to clean those cuts and make sure there's no serious damage. Is that okay?" Jessica nodded, unable to speak around the unfamiliar sensation of someone caring about her well-being without expecting anything in return. Marcus worked with gentle, practiced hands, cleaning the small cuts around her eye and jaw with antiseptic wipes and examining the bruises with the clinical detachment of a medical professional. "The bruising is consistent with being struck by a closed fist," he said matter-of-factly. "The pattern suggests someone right-handed, probably taller than you. The injuries are about 3 to 4 days old." Jessica stared at him, amazed by his ability to read the story written on her face with such accuracy. "How do you know all that?" she asked quietly. "Because I see injuries like this several times a week in the emergency room," Marcus replied, his voice gentle but honest, "and because I used to have similar bruises when I was your age." The revelation that Dr. Marcus Chen had once been in a situation similar to her own shifted something fundamental in Jessica's understanding of this encounter. This wasn't just a wealthy man taking pity on a delivery driver. This was someone who understood her situation from the inside, who had lived through his own version of her nightmare and emerged on the other side. "You?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. The man sitting across from her seemed so confident, so successful, so completely in control of his life, that the idea of him being someone's victim seemed impossible. "My first relationship in college," Marcus explained, his voice taking on the distant quality of someone accessing painful memories. "I was 19, he was 25, and I thought I was in love. It took me 2 years to realize that love shouldn't involve fearing for your safety or making excuses for someone else's violence." Jessica felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. The first tears she had allowed herself to shed in months. Hearing her experience reflected in someone else's story, especially someone who had clearly built a successful life after escaping, made her feel less alone than she had in over a year. "How did you get out?" she asked, the question she had been asking herself every day for the past 8 months. "Slowly," Marcus admitted, "and with a lot of help that I was initially too proud to accept. I had convinced myself that I could handle it on my own, that asking for help was admitting failure. It wasn't until a professor noticed my injuries and basically forced me to accept assistance that I realized I didn't have to solve everything by myself." He paused, studying her face with the same careful attention he had given her injuries. "What's your name?" he asked gently, Jessica Martinez. Well, Jessica Martinez, I'm going to make you the same offer that Professor made me 20 years ago. No strings attached, no expectations, just practical help from someone who understands what you're going through. Jessica felt her heart rate accelerate. She had dreamed of this moment, someone appearing in her life who could help her escape. But now that it was happening, it felt too good to be true. I have a guest house behind this property, Marcus continued. It's small but comfortable, and it's completely separate from the main house. You could stay there while you figure out your next steps. No rent, no obligations, just a safe place to be while you decide what you want to do. I can't, Jessica said automatically, even as every cell in her body screamed at her to accept his offer. I don't even know you, and I can't just abandon my responsibilities. What responsibilities? Marcus asked, his voice kind but direct. To the person who gave you those bruises. The question hung in the air between them, exposing the absurdity of her loyalty to someone who had been systematically destroying her sense of self-worth for over a year. He's not always like this, Jessica said, repeating the rationalization she had used countless times to justify staying with Derek. He's under a lot of stress with work, and money is tight, and... Jessica, Marcus interrupted gently, those are explanations, not excuses. I used to make the same rationalizations about my ex-boyfriend. He was stressed about school. His family didn't accept him. He was struggling with his identity. I could find 100 reasons to excuse his behavior, but explanations don't heal bruises, and understanding why someone hurts you doesn't make it okay that they do. Jessica sat in silence, processing words that she had needed to hear for months, but had never allowed herself to believe. Think about it, Marcus said, standing up and walking to a desk in the corner of the room. He returned with a business card and a set of keys. This is my contact information, and these are keys to the guest house. Take them with you. You don't have to decide anything tonight, but if you need a safe place to go, you'll have one. Jessica stared at the keys in her palm, small pieces of metal that represented possibilities she had almost given up hoping for. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this for a complete stranger? Marcus smiled, the first truly warm expression she had seen from him since he opened the door. Because someone did it for me when I needed it most, he said simply, and because I've spent the last 20 years looking for ways to pay that kindness forward. Jessica drove back to her apartment complex in a daze, Marcus's keys clutched in her left hand while she steered with her right. The conversation had lasted less than an hour, but it felt like her entire world had shifted on its axis. For the first time in months, she had a concrete alternative to the life she was living. Not just an abstract dream of someday getting out, but actual keys to an actual place where she could be safe tonight if she chose to be. The lights were on in her apartment when she pulled into the parking lot, which meant Derek was awake and waiting for her. Jessica sat in her car for several minutes, staring up at the window and trying to decide what she was going to do. She could go upstairs, put the keys in her hiding place with her savings, and continue living the way she had been living, hoping that Derek's moods would improve or that she would somehow find the courage to leave on her own terms. Or she could trust the stranger who had seen her bruises and recognize them for what they were, evidence that she deserved better than what she was accepting. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. "Where the hell are you? You should have been home an hour ago." Jessica stared at the message, recognizing the familiar tone of accusation and control that had become the soundtrack of her life. Even her working late, working to earn money for their household, was somehow being turned into evidence of her inadequacy. She thought about Marcus's words. Explanations don't heal bruises, and understanding why someone hurts you doesn't make it okay that they do. Before she could change her mind, Jessica started her car and drove back toward Queen Anne Hill. The guest house was exactly as Marcus had described it, small but comfortable, with a main room that combined living space and kitchen, a separate bedroom, and a bathroom with a shower that actually had decent water pressure. More importantly, it felt safe in a way that Jessica had almost forgotten was possible. There were no footsteps in the hallway that might signal an approaching confrontation, no need to gauge someone's mood before speaking, no walking on eggshells around furniture that might become weapons during an argument. Marcus had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Jessica, there's food in the refrigerator, extra blankets in the bedroom closet, and my number is on the fridge if you need anything. Take all the time you need to figure out what comes next. You're safe here. Marcus. Jessica found herself crying as she read the note. Not the silent, hidden tears she had grown accustomed to, but deep, releasing sobs that seemed to carry months of accumulated fear and tension out of her body. She cried for the person she used to be before Derek convinced her she was worthless. She cried for all the customers who had looked right through her without seeing her pain, and she cried with relief that someone had finally seen her, really seen her, and decided she was worth helping. Her phone buzzed constantly with increasingly angry messages from Derek, but for the first time in over a year, Jessica turned it off instead of rushing to respond to his demands. The next morning, Marcus knocked gently on the guest house door with coffee and pastries from a nearby bakery. "How did you sleep?" he asked, settling into a chair across from her at the small kitchen table. "Better than I have in months," Jessica admitted, "but I can't stay here forever. I need to figure out what I'm going to do about work, about my stuff at Derek's place, about everything." "One step at a time," Marcus said. "What feels like the most important thing to handle first?" Jessica thought about this question for several minutes. In the clear light of morning, away from Derek's constant presence and criticism, her priorities seemed much clearer than they had in months. "I want to get my things," she said finally, "and I want to tell him it's over. I've been too scared to do it when I had nowhere else to go. But now—" "Would you like company for that conversation?" Marcus asked. "I have the day off, and sometimes these discussions go better when there's a witness present." Jessica felt a surge of gratitude so strong it was almost overwhelming. This man, who owed her nothing and had known her for less than 24 hours, was offering to help her reclaim her life in the most practical way possible. 3 hours later, Jessica stood in the doorway of her former apartment while Marcus waited in the hallway, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to give her privacy for what needed to be said. Derek's shock at seeing her with someone else, especially someone who was obviously successful and confident, had deflated his usual aggressive bluster into confused silence. "I'm leaving," Jessica said simply. "I'm taking my things and I'm not coming back." For the first time in their relationship, Derek seemed to understand that his usual tactics of intimidation and emotional manipulation weren't going to work. The presence of a witness, combined with Jessica's newfound confidence, had shifted the power dynamic completely. 20 minutes later, Jessica's few belongings were packed in her car, and she was driving away from the apartment complex for the last time. In her rearview mirror, she could see Derek standing in the parking lot, still seemingly unable to process what had just happened. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked as they drove back toward Queen Anne Hill. Jessica considered the question carefully. She felt scared about the uncertainty ahead, grateful for the unexpected help she had received, and proud of herself for finally choosing her own safety over Derek's convenience. But more than anything, she felt visible in a way she hadn't experienced in over a year. "It feels like I exist again," she said finally. And for the first time since this entire experience had begun, Jessica Martinez smiled without having to check first whether it was safe to do so. The end.